everyone, and thank you all for joining this week's Next Normal series from Worth Live on how COVID is causing us to reassess mental health in and out of the workplace during Mental Illness Awareness Week. Firstly, I hope you and your loved ones are keeping well during what has and continues to be a challenging time for so many people. I'm Juliet Scott-Croxford, CEO at Worth Media, and I'm delighted to be joined by our special guest today, John Broderick, Senior Director of External Affairs for Dartmouth Hitchcock Health, Mona Lisa Como, Board of Directors and Treasurer at Bring Change to Mind, and Kathleen Entwistle, Managing Director and Private Wealth Advisor at Morgan Stanley Private Wealth Management. We're also joined today by Jim McCann, our Chairman at Worth, who is passionate about today's subject. Jim's also the founder of 1-800-Flowers, and this topic has been an area of interest to Jim for a very long time. So a very warm welcome to you all today. Hi, everyone.
Hey, how are we doing?
Hi there.
Hi.
Hi there. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for being here. And I've just seen some people on the chat already, which is great. So please do use the chat function at the bottom of your screen to share comments and questions as we go. Our intention at Worth is to create conversations that help inspire and inform our community, many of whom are investors, entrepreneurs, and business leaders who want to leave a positive impact on the world and help to create a more inclusive and equal economy and society for the benefit of everyone. And we call that Worth Beyond Wealth. So we hope you find today's session valuable and insightful. It's certainly an important topic for us to cover. Forward thinking is really the essence of this show and of this series, The Next Normal, where Worth is looking ahead to what the world looks like in this new environment that we're now living in. COVID has caused the mental health crisis in the US to worsen, and in June, 40% of American adults reported that they were struggling with their mental health or substance abuse. Now more than ever, it's important for people to talk about it and to take care of their own mental health, and for workplaces to learn how they can support employees who are struggling. So we're delighted to be joined by experts and leaders, John Broderick, Mona Lisa Como, Kathleen Entwistle, and Jim McCann, to share their perspectives on how COVID is causing us to reassess mental health in and out of the workplace. You'll all be familiar with this format by now. Just a few housekeeping rules. It is a conversation. We do welcome questions from you. We are recording this session, so we'll also be sharing the video on worth.com after this. And we can unmute you so you can ask the question directly to the speakers, or if you'd prefer to stay anonymous, that's totally fine, and we can weave it into the conversation as we go. Please, if you're typing comments in chat, just type it to all panelists and all attendees so everyone gets to see it. So let's get started. Jim, I know you have a question to open with for the panelists today. Why don't we start with that?
Well, it's for all of us, and here it is in the condensed form. You know, I will confess to you that when Labor Day arrives, and that usually that Monday night, we have a beach house where 3 kids and 6 grandkids will gather each summer. It's a special time for my wife and I, and I will confess to you that after the last car leaves and the taillights disappear out the driveway and it's just my wife and I there, I do get a case of the blahs every year. And fortunately, my wife will remind me to live in the moment and not worry about the fact that we're not going to see the kids or grandkids as much as we did. We're fortunate that they all live nearby, though. But you know, it's just that sense of it's over. And now that the summer is in the rearview mirror, and the days are getting cooler and shorter and darker. Our windows are closing. We're not going to be outdoors as much as we were in the summer months. When this COVID first struck, it was in this, middle of the beginning of the spring, let's say. And so we had the summer to look forward to. And I'm concerned, and I'm asking you, am I right to be concerned that with remote work lingering and more the norm now than we could have imagined, and as we're more and more isolated and we don't have the normal distractions of the fall, Halloween is not going to be like other Halloweens. youth sports aren't as active or as prevalent as they were. College football, it's on, it's off, it's not happening. With all of those distraction gone, with all those other things, I'm concerned, and I wonder if you share that concern, that this recipe is not a good one for the mental health of all of us.
Mona Lisa, do you want to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. So thanks for that question, Jim. I think we're creatures, we're social creatures. And I think our DNA structure is one where whether we agree with it or not, whether you're introverts and extroverts, humans grow through this social interaction. And so I don't think that we've seen a time like this before where there's been such isolation. We know isolation doesn't help in the normal stances, like you said, when you miss your children and your grandchildren. And for those who have mental health conditions, it even more exacerbates the condition because there is no social outreach. And no matter how much we try with Zoom and phone calls, there's nothing like a hug. There's nothing like a handshake. There's nothing like, the warmth of smelling your kid's hair when you haven't smelled them. Even my adult daughter, when she comes home from New York, I still want to smell her hair. That's just who we are as humans. And I think we have to acknowledge that this is a problem.
The biggest threat, Mona Lisa, I have now when my grandkids are around is my big threat is, I'm going to hug you. Oh, no. And I worry about the long-term effect of that.
No, it's very challenging, Jim. And but I just want to emphasize this too. Before COVID struck 6 months ago, there was a mental health crisis in this country, and it's still here. It's getting worse in some quarters, but the only good news as it relates to mental health and COVID is that people are now seeing it, and a lot of people are experiencing what you're describing through the isolation and the loneliness and the stress. But it's been here for generations. We just haven't dealt with it. And in order to do that, we need to talk about it. And to be very honest, the workplace is probably the place we ought to be talking. Traditionally, we haven't. Everyone's perfect, and nobody wants to acknowledge any weakness or concern. Businesses need to do more. They need to change their culture, and it will save money, but that's not the reason to do it. It will make your employees feel committed and less stressed, and it will pay dividends to the business. But people gather at work and they gather in schools, and those are two spaces we need to really talk. We haven't done that traditionally.
Kathy, how have you been looking after your mental health, and how do you kind of look after your team in that regard?
That's a great question. I will start with just saying pre-COVID, I had something called my self-help Saturdays or self-care Saturdays. So my family used to tease me, but that was the day that I just did some extra nice things for myself. So that was always like a regular coping. In terms of, it's been tough, I think, for everybody. And I am a believer, along with Jim, I'm worried about, the light. It's going to be darker. We're not going to have as much light out. And we know that light, and there's actually like a natural light that you can get to help with depression or, low grade feelings of, sorrow or sadness. And now we're going to be in a darker time period, a colder time period. We don't have the spring or the summer to look forward to. So I think there's a lot of issues there, and I totally agree with that. And COVID has accelerated a lot of things. We've talked about that in the past, but it's also accelerated mental health challenges, or has brought it to, exposed it more. I think it's also harder for people to cope. So like, as John said, we had all these issues prior, but I just think that, when somebody gets sort of to like the last leg, like they don't have much more coping skills left because of COVID and the feelings brought on by COVID. So things that might not normally affect us and we might normally be able to cope very well with, we can't. And I see it. I see it with, clients. I see it with myself. I see it with friends and colleagues. Our tolerance is low, and we really have to protect ourselves and those, around us, including our employees. So I do run a team at Morgan Stanley, and it is important to me that they're all, in a good spot mentally and emotionally. So we do try to do things like the days that they're in, just like everyone needs to take breaks. We have scheduled breaks. You don't get to not take a break. That's really important. Trying not to have people work, with COVID and work from home, it's changed so much. We're all blending home life and work life, and that gray area can really add to our stress and duress as well. And then of course, people are getting let go, or they're worried about their jobs, or just the financial stress that's added onto everything else is also an issue. So it's a big challenge. And I think the starting point is we have to think about protecting ourselves and protecting our wellness.
I couldn't agree more. And Mona Lisa and John, you've got some incredible story, both of you, about sort of what brought you into this area. Mona Lisa, I'd love to hear from you just briefly about your background and how you became more actively involved in mental illness and mental health.
Yeah, thanks for that. It was really, I think, a blessing in the universes colliding, because my son has bipolar. And I, as a parent and also as a senior leader and executive, had two different lives. It was that of a mother who was trying to protect her child, and that of an executive who knew that it existed in the workplace, but did not really address it. And I personally, after being recruited to the board of Bring Change to Mind, was really uniquely blessed. So this is an organization that is very focused on fighting the stigma. And one of the things that my son had said to me early on when he was diagnosed with bipolar was, I would rather have cancer than have bipolar, because at least my friends will understand me taking medication. And when you hear that as a parent, you feel like you have failed, because there's nothing you can do. Not the best doctors can't make him take his meds. And I had learned also through the stigmatization that I actually was adding to it by making excuses when he was sick. I would say he's not in school for a reason, by not directly addressing mental health as his condition. It showed that I was embarrassed. And so I learned that I needed to step forward and be open about it. I learned that I had to change my language and say he isn't bipolar, but he has bipolar, just like he isn't cancer, he has cancer. So it's been a learning process through this wonderful organization, Bring Change to Mind, which is very focused on changing the stigma, because what we know is, much like AIDS had this transition many decades ago, breast cancer had this, until the stigma goes away, we, or at least society is okay with it, we will always be fighting this challenge. And it feels like it's getting better that we're talking about it. And COVID unequivocally is putting this right on our lap, especially in the workplace.
And Mona Lisa, how do you help normalize it in the environment that your son is in? Presumably he goes to a regular school, does he?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that has been, I think high schools are far more adept at handling a mental health crisis than organizations are, sadly. We in organizations tend to focus more on HIPAA, privacy. We tend to focus on liability, because for some reason we think there's liability with mental health patients. If I know you have depression and you did something, am I liable? So for me, the high schools, surprisingly, when you open up to many of the counselors, they appreciate parents who share this, because many parents are too embarrassed, because it is seen as a failure on me as a parent. What did I do to cause depression? What kind of environment did I create for him? And so by me openly saying he has a condition, it has, and I think John had mentioned this not too long ago when we had spoke yesterday, it's amazing how many parents come forward after you take that first step and say it, and educators appreciate it. It is not the case in the workplace just yet. I think we're getting there, but high schools, I think, are far more appreciative, because they're seeing this issue being more pervasive in this generation than it has been in previous generations.
Thank you, Mona Lisa. And John, if we could come to you next and just to share your story, I think we just need to unmute you because there was a bit of feedback. So if you're able to unmute, and then we should be able to hear you again.
I think Mal, oh, there he goes.
There you go.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll be brief because I don't want to consume too much time, but I'm the least likely person in America to be on this call. I'm a baby boomer, not that you could have guessed that. And I grew up in a world where nobody talked about mental health. Nobody talked about it. My mother used to whisper the word cancer when I was a child. And we've come a long way, and we've got a long way to go in mental illness. I was a judge for 15 years. I was a law school dean. I now work at Dartmouth Hitchcock. I've been very blessed in a lot of ways. I had two sons, 11 and 13, when my 13-year-old came down with mental health problems, which he didn't understand. How would you know that if you were feeling that way? And we didn't see it for what it was. And we didn't notice it really until we saw drinking when he was in college, but kids drink in college. But his seemed to be worse. He got a master's degree. He had trouble keeping employment. It was attributed to his drinking. We were told he was an alcoholic. And I was on the Supreme Court of New Hampshire at the time that this was now happening. And we were told we had to put him out of our house, literally out, and let him hit bottom and turn his life around. And we thought that was the only solution. And so that's what we did. It was well-intentioned, but it was the worst decision we ever could have made. And as a result of that, in the weeks that followed, my son assaulted me. I went to the intensive care unit at a local hospital. I was in the ICU for 6 or 8 days. My master's educated, decent, funny, talented son ended up in the state prison in New Hampshire. It was all over the news. My doctors went on the Today Show. It wasn't exactly below the radar. And when my son got to the prison, we learned what his problems were. And it wasn't the drinking wasn't a problem, but it was more a symptom than a cause. And we were told he had very serious depression, anxiety, and panic attacks are off the charts, and that he was self-medicating. And when we learned that in that place, I remember that day pretty clearly. I knew at that moment that we had failed him, that I was the parent. I should have known something, but I didn't. And I thought mental health problems were all hopeless. I know now that's far from true. But in any event, when he was in the prison, they worked with him and turned his life around. I thought it was impossible. He hadn't had a drink in 15 years. I performed his wedding in prison. I don't recommend prison weddings, by the way, but the receptions are pretty inexpensive. That's the only plus. And the photographer was an inmate. I now have a 12-year-old granddaughter who's just beautiful. And my family is healed in a very public way. And it was very difficult. But because I'm a baby boomer, I never talked about it. It was shameful. I just didn't talk about it. And then 4 years ago, I got involved in this campaign about mental health awareness. And when asked to get involved, surprisingly, I said yes. And in the last 4 years before COVID struck, and I speak wherever I'm asked, by the way, I'm also free, so I come at a good price. That probably helps. But I've spoken 520 times to 110,000 people. I've been to 250 middle schools and high schools. I've spoken to 85,000 young people. And despite the opportunities I've had in my lifetime, I mean this, the work I've done the last 4 years of my life has been the most impactful and important work I have ever done. And it has opened my eyes. So I feel pretty schooled here to say to business people, I've seen your future workforce. I've hugged them. They've hugged me. 1 in 5 adolescents has a mental health problem in our country. 1 in 5. 1 in 5 adults will too. Half the kids who I see, which statistically is proven out, who are having a mental health problem aren't getting help anywhere. We do not have a mental health system in the United States, and we never will until people are willing to say, my mother, my father, my cousin, myself. That's a huge leap. We've done it with cancer, which my mother used to whisper. We've done it with HIV. We've done it with ALS. Why are we holding back? And the last thing I want to say, because I'm patiently impatient about where we are. I wish I were 40 because I devote my whole life to this, because I see it now. Everybody with a mental health problem, I don't care what it is, how old they are, they have 2 things in common. Number 1, they didn't ask for it. It's true. And number 2, they don't deserve it. That's true too. And as Mona Lisa was saying, stigma is crippling. And stigma, by the way, is not an invading force. It's everyone on this call today. We're the stigma. We're the people who are judging people who are suffering. We don't do that anywhere else. We wouldn't say to somebody with diabetes, oh, snap out of it. We say foolish things like that. Or as Mona Lisa said, our language is bad. You are mentally ill. No, you're not. You have a mental illness. We conflate the person and the illness when it comes to mental health. And frankly, the business community loses hundreds of billions of dollars every year because of mental health issues in their workforce, either because of you job train people and they turn over, absences from work. Mental health, by the way, is the principal reason people are absent, either their own or some family member they love. And then there's called presenteeism. So you're at work, but you're in an environment where you don't talk about mental health. And so your efficiency declines. Some economists have said that's 2.5 days a month of work time. So it adds up. But it's just morally wrong what we're doing in mental health. It's always been morally wrong. And what I now realize is how many people and families are suffering. It's not the people across town with the broken shutter. It could be the CEO's son or daughter. It could be the CEO. And we're so afraid to talk about it, we penalize people. And we need to change it. And business leaders among all the people in this country have a very powerful voice for change if they want to use it. And I hope they do, because I've talked to your future employees, by the way. They have record levels of anxiety and depression. They're coming your way, and we could treat that if we had a system.
John, what are you seeing in terms of treatment, in terms of public awareness, corporate awareness, that gives you hope that there's better times coming?
I'll tell you what gives me hope. This young generation, I love these kids, by the way. I love them. They are smart and non-judgmental, and they will talk to you. They talk to me. I'm a perfect stranger. I'm the grandfather they've never met. But when I tell them my family's journey, they open up. They will change it. If all of us on this call do nothing, they will change it. But I don't want to wait 20 years. I want people to move now. And so kids are ready. Schools are probably doing as much as they can do. They're pretty good. Some workplaces are getting better. Cisco Systems, which I recommend as a gold standard on this initiative of mental health in the workplace. Starbucks, by the way, is taking a huge spot there as well. And so I think there are corporate people who see the need, and it has a financial cost if you don't deal with it. So there's an economic incentive to understand it. But there's a moral imperative, I think, to do something about it. I'm just going to give you this visual. I'll be quiet, I promise. I spoke at a private school in New England, a very exclusive private school. And you would know the name if I gave it to you. And I spoke to hundreds and hundreds of these kids. high achievers in the auditorium. And when I finished speaking, the senior who had introduced me asked this question in that place. If there's anyone in this auditorium today who has a mental health problem, or someone you love has a mental health problem, those were the only two categories, would you please stand up? Now, that was early in my mission here. Of the almost 600 kids there, I'd say over 550 stood up. And I thought, this is hiding in plain sight. Why aren't we dealing with it? And most of it's treatable. These are high achieving kids, most of them coming from high achieving families. And most of them you'd be proud to have in your workplace. It doesn't mean they're not suffering, but it doesn't mean it's not treatable either. So I'm optimistic because of young people. I'm optimistic because of schools. And I'm growing optimistic because Worth is having a program like this, which I genuinely applaud. I mean that. And people listening today can make a difference if they choose.
Kathy, how can we make a difference, each of us individually? You're an employer, you work in a large company, you work with families, both entrepreneurial and multi-generational wealth families every day. You must see this in those family situations on a regular basis. What can we do?
I would say there's a few things we can do, and I do see it on a regular basis. And John, if you asked us to raise our hands too, right? I mean, this is what happens. So the first thing I think is the easiest and simplest thing we can start with is so simple. It's being kind to everyone else around you. You don't know where someone is coming from when they're starting a conversation with you, whether it's in the workplace or it's a client or an interaction. You don't know what happened to them that day. You don't know what experience they have. And just sometimes by little kindness, you're really making a positive impact in somebody else's life. I know it sounds trite. I know it sounds so simple and Pollyanna, but I really believe that, really, truly believe that. How we treat others really makes a positive impact to them. And also the conversation, as Mona Lisa and John both said, having a conversation and talking about it, destigmatizing the concept, letting people know it's okay, it's normal, it's not something that's just happening to you or your family. So to be able to have that conversation. And then, of course, we also have maybe family members that are going through something like that. We want to protect them and make sure that they're in good shape, financially, wellness, the right doctors, the right support, the right, situation set up for them. So having conversations with families about protecting their loved ones who are suffering from mental illness, there's ways to support that too. And some people who have mental health issues will be high functioning and they can go and get, great jobs and do things that they love and they're passionate about. And some won't be. And they're going to need our help and protection as well. So we have to plan for both. So I would say kindness, conversations, and protecting are the three things that I can think of that we as individuals can do to help. As a community, again, I'll echo what John said, to have this conversation today is such a great way to share a concept with so many people who might not know what to do with this. The fact that John goes and speaks to students at schools, I believe students are the most at risk because there's so many things going on in their lives. There's so much pressure, there's so many different, you don't know what's going on in their home life. And to continue to have those conversations and set up safe spaces to have those conversations, whether it's in schools or in the workplace, I think is really, really important. I agree though with Mona Lisa and John that I don't think there's nearly enough in place yet in the workplace. It's encouraging to see some of these companies taking steps, but there's a lot more that we can do. There's a lot more room to improve. And I guess that's the positive. We can do more. And that's amazing. There's more to do.
Mona Lisa and Kathy, apologies. I've moved house and we've got some electricians that decided to turn off the internet whilst I was doing this call.
Did we lose you, Juliet?
Lost me for a second, but I'm back. One of the questions I had was whether you think the current pandemic has helped remove some of that stigma attached to mental health, because I think as business leaders, we've all had to adjust to our teams working remotely. We've all had to think about different ways of working and how to check in with them in different ways, how to kind of rethink about our day, given we're all in front of screens. And I'm just wondering whether this has been a good thing to help remove some of the stigma attached to this conversation, or not. And I don't know whether you've seen any sort of acceleration in that, Mona Lisa, because of this time.
I actually have. I've never spoken so much about mental health in the workplace since COVID. And that's because more and more organizations have recognized, especially as early as March, that when their employees started to go remote, lack of sympathy and empathy for the working conditions, for the anxiety was not tolerated by employees. And many just didn't want to be a part of an organization that was seen as cold and not addressing the anxiety that came with the entire pandemic. And so I think just trying to deal with the anxiety of the workplace has forced every company to say, okay, as a leader, we should be more empathetic. As individuals, we should be asking individual manager or associates, like, how's your day? Like, that is not something that usually happened. And more are asking when we return to work, and I've worked with several organizations in the Fortune 500 who've now said, what do we think we need to do to make them feel comfortable at work? Now, what's great about it is they're acknowledging that mental health exists. Now, the question is how far they're going to take that. And one of the primary issues I know that's coming up in this benefit season is many companies do not cover behavioral health as core health. It's considered optional, and many employees have to go out of pocket for it. So I think that's going to be something we're seeing more and more companies do, and I encourage them to do that as well.
On that front, I just follow up briefly on what Mona Lisa said. In March of this year, Starbucks had another initiative in their ongoing mental health campaign. So they provide 20 free mental health sessions to their employees with a counselor or coach every year. And they recognize that employee health includes mental health. It's funny how we always stop at the neck. I don't understand that, but we shouldn't at all. They also, Starbucks has an app that they make available. It's called Headspace. It's a wellness app to their employees. I also think it's really important, if you want to deal with this issue, to really educate your supervisors and managers on what mental health looks like and feels like and acts like. And 2 years ago now, I was speaking to a business group, and a fellow said to me, how will we know, John, when we don't need this awareness campaign anymore? His name was Bob. I said, Bob, here's how you'll know. If you were my supervisor, Bob, I would have no problem coming to see you this afternoon and saying, Bob, I have a real bad disc issue, and I have an emergency appointment tomorrow with an orthopedic surgeon. I won't be in. And you would say, John, I'm sorry to hear that. Good luck on that. Keep us posted. But I wouldn't feel comfortable, Bob, coming and saying, Bob, I've been crying a lot. And people think I'm really depressed. And so I have kind of an emergency appointment with a psychiatrist tomorrow. I said, do you hear those as health issues? Are they the same to you? And he smiled. And I said, well, you're not smiling, Bob. We don't need the campaign. But we do need the campaign because mental illness is treated still to this day as something that you cause or because you're weak or frail. It is so unfair to people. And the stereotypes around it are wrong. Kevin Love plays for the Cleveland Cavaliers. He had to leave a game a year or so ago because of panic attack. The team didn't want to acknowledge it. They said he had migraine headaches. And God love him. He said, no, I had panic attack. Michael Phelps, the Olympic gold medalist, has depression. Prince Harry, no small figure, talks about his own depression. That's how change happens. It takes courage for people to say it, particularly in a world that wants to penalize it. That's how change will happen. And ultimately, inside of corporate America, like every other place I've ever been, leadership from the top is what matters most. And if you look at Cisco Systems and Starbucks and look at the emails those CEOs sent to start that ball rolling, it makes you proud. And it's also good business. It's not being charitable, it's being smart. It's what it's being. And so I think American business could really help their workforce and help the bottom line by being smarter about it and less judgmental.
John and Kathy, Mona Lisa, Juliet, I think there's some good things happening. As a small investor in startups and tech space, I think there's an awful lot of interesting things coming in behavioral health. We invested in a company a long time ago, when I say a long time, several years ago, called Talkspace, and Michael Phelps, the swimmer, is a spokesperson for Talkspace. And I remember hearing Orrin Smith, the founder of that company, give his talk when we first decided to invest. And he said, and I think I'll have this fairly close, he said that more than half of the population in the United States are referred for counseling by their primary care physician at least once in their life, and less than 3% ever go. Mm-hmm. And he broke it down to the barriers to that, to people going to get help, was stigma, was access, and cost. And now you're seeing several companies, and Talkspace is just one of them. We're also invested in a peer-to-peer help site I'll tell you about later. But I think the fact that you could have a digital contact, telephone or text, with a licensed professional who's supervised, who can help you. If I'm a veteran dealing with PTSD and I live in a rural community in Iowa, I might not have access. But if I can have a plan with a therapist and a check-in call for 10 minutes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday morning, and it's accessible and it's affordable because the expenses are managed, and there's a AI overlaid to that where the sessions are being monitored for key phrases to help the therapist to be alerted to different situations. I think that's a very promising step where capital will flow to a solution that's technology-based and technology-aided. Are you seeing anything, any of you folks seeing anything out there that gives you that kind of hope?
I'll go. So there's this one out of the UK called Form Score. Rob Stevenson has just created this new app. He actually has bipolar as well. And you basically give a score. It's a very simple app. You share it with your friends. And out of 10, you say your form today is, I'm an 8. And if you have a 4, then it alerts your friends and says, hey, I'm not having a good day, and people reach out. And so this is something that I think is in beta, but I agree with you, Jim. There's been a tremendous amount of new startups that we've seen in the behavioral healthcare. And what that means is that more and more people want, that's great for us. That also shows that the consumer is acknowledging that mental health is a need. I've also seen, I'm sure we all have this, the increase in amount of meditation apps that people are taking. That's a good sign, right? Wellness is a good sign. I still think we have a little bit work to making sure that employees believe that their companies are not going to use their mental health against them. That is something that we see a lot. EAP, the Employee Assistance Program, is covered by many companies, but is the least used benefit because most employees believe if they take the EAP program that their employer will know and therefore it will be used against them. And that is not true because of our laws, but I think companies have to come right out now and start saying that, and then also offering some of these apps as well.
You know, the largest provider, Jim, of mental health services, this is 2020, the largest provider of mental health services in the United States are jails and prisons. That's a pretty bad model. In New Hampshire, in the state prison, the men's prison, 65% of the inmates have a diagnosable mental illness. They didn't develop it the day after they arrived. Half of all mental illness in the United States, half, begins by age 14. My son was 13. 2/3 by age 23. If you get to mental illness, I'm told by all the clinicians, if you find it early, treat it early, the chances of success are much improved. Lastly, one of the guys, he's a terrific psychiatrist at Dartmouth. He's in his late 50s, graduate of Harvard Medical School. He said in a public forum last November, when asked this question, how would you rate the mental health system, doctor, in the United States? And he said, well, let me answer it this way. The way we treat breast cancer today, not 30 years ago, today, it's mostly women, but not exclusively. We get them into treatment quickly. We have very good protocols. We're seeing wonderful results. That's pretty close to a 10, given the state of knowledge today. But on that same 10-point scale, I would rate the mental health system, this was November of last year, as a 1 or a 2. Last year in the United States, we graduated, everybody all in, we graduated 1,000 psychiatrists. Are you kidding me? They don't get reimbursed like orthopedists or neurologists. So that's a problem, but ultimately there'll never be enough of them. And so we need more mental health counselors and we need technology, Jim. I couldn't agree with you more because we're never going to have a more robust system without it. And so I think that's key to any solution to this problem. And then we need to talk about it, as Melissa was saying, and stop penalizing it. When I can come out of my bedroom and tell my parents that I've been on my app with a mental health professional and not feel funny about it, then maybe it'll be working. If I can tell my friend at work that they should try this app, then we'll be further along. We're not there yet, but we're making progress, slowly, but we're making progress.
But now, Mona Lisa, your world, that there's when you look at the big health insurers in this country, Cigna, United Healthcare, both are very focused on mental health now. And they're spending lots of money in venture worlds on these behavioral health systems. I know Cigna does a big research report, and so does United, on loneliness. And frankly, I'm of the opinion that there's a loneliness epidemic in this country that we need to come to grips with, and it's only being exaggerated by COVID. But then there's other. So I think there's good behavioral tools coming, and then I'm a fan of the work of a professor down at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Health, where Dr. Everly, he created something that's very practical and usable called the psychological first aid kit. And it's just things you can do for yourself to understand where you are, to check yourself. You feel these behaviors are occurring, you feel this happening, check yourself. And there's good practical tools there. I encourage you to look at his work. Dr. Everly's a terrific mental health professional. And he looks at it from the grand scale of things. Not only does he have the practical tools, but he reported, Juliet, you mentioned earlier on about year-over-year stats. He mentioned that June over June, so early in the pandemic, the population was twice as anxious as they were a year ago and 3 times more depressed. Those trends are ugly. And as I stated in the beginning, I fear that the recipe that we're going through now of isolation, loneliness, normal distractions not there, that it could get worse. So I think we have to be good at checking ourselves, and we need more tools out there for us to dial into. So I said I'd mention another one we invested in. I mentioned to one of my really terrific board members at Flowers, a fellow named Adam Hampt. He said, what would you like to do that you're not going to get to at the company? And I said, I'd love to have a peer-to-peer help site where people who come to us, they're coming to express themselves and connect to the important people in their lives. And lots of them are going through things that other people had already been through. And wouldn't it be great if we could find a way to connect those people? We all wish we had that great friend who you can call up and say, hey, I know you've already been through this, but I'm experiencing now, and they just know how to talk to you about it. Unfortunately, we don't all have that. And certainly there's different circumstances. So he called me back about a month later and said, I thought I heard of a company that was doing exactly what you want to do. And it's a small Israeli startup called Wisdo. And these people are doing exactly that. So we contacted them, we wound up investing in the company, and we put them on our website, on the Flowers website, under our connection communities, we call it. And we have 7 different communities of people experiencing how to cope with a loss, how to deal with loneliness, the special stresses on caregivers at home. And so everyone says, what is a florist investing in a company like this, or especially when they didn't have a business plan to make money? I said, it wasn't about that. It's our chance to do something good. And I'm so delighted to tell you that tens of thousands of people in the couple of months that we've been making this available are engaging and finding help, but more importantly, going on to be helpers. No remuneration. They're doing it out of the goodness of their hearts, those who have the need, and then those who have the ability to help others. It's heartening. So I do see bright spots besides technology, but frankly, Wisdo is powered by good technology, good algorithms, good vetting processes to take the inappropriate people out of the mix. But I think technology is going to be our savior here.
Yeah, Tim, we had the founder of Wisdo, right? Was he the founder of Wisdo on one of our panels about a
Early
month ago?
on.
We
Yeah,
did.
Boaz. He's
Yeah,
just a
and he was
remarkable guy.
fantastic. And when you were asking us I was thinking about him. So when you brought it up, that was, interesting. I thought he was terrific. And the idea of to use technology to help people with that issue, or help to, match them with people that have already experienced it. Like, that whole concept is very forward thinking. And technology is going to level the playing field, I think, for a lot of the people that might not necessarily have access to the support and help they need, or know where to get it, or have the funds to do so. And having that on a platform where you might have access a little bit easier, a little bit less expensive, using a technology platform, I do think is going to be helpful, just like these listening apps are helpful. I was going to also mention, I know that there's a lot of startup companies right now who are doing life coaching, but also with a wellness twist to it. And I've been around someone who's in that business and listening to the conversations they're having. And a lot of it is about that support, that mental health support that people need, along with their career search or their passion or whatever they're trying to accomplish in their world. It's got that mental health component to it. And I think the fact that it's being addressed is really important and encouraging.
I think that there's a huge amount of innovation and great sort of startups and technology in this space. Together All is another one that was the Big White Wall. They've just rebranded. They were UK based, and I know a good friend of mine has been in the chair seat there, and it's like an anonymous community where members can support each other. And they're not only working with corporations, but they're actually working with cities. And I think engaging with cities and communities at that scale is quite interesting in thinking about mental health as well, and mental illness. I was going to ask you, Mona Lisa and John, like, beyond the technology and the innovation, and before companies are embracing that, what strategies can they use to start to kind of normalize this as a conversation in the workplace? And what advice would you give them, both in kind of spotting signs for people that might be suffering, but also to kind of help them take the first step if they haven't got there yet?
Yeah, I'll go first. I think the first thing is having to reframe the conversation. And I think for any company and any leader who's tackling with how do I tackle this, I always go back with, if you found out they had cancer, how would you treat them? And it always is interesting because there's always this kind of conflict, like, well, it's not the same. It's like, and then you have to kind of break down that own stereotype or stigma that they have. I think that's the first thing, is helping them reframe in their own mind that they've got to treat this as a normal illness. And then secondly, being very open, which is, some leaders are good at this and some are not. And having a simple question like, how are you doing? That seems like a very innocuous ask, but I think the humanity in asking that question, like we're used to saying that in the office, but now knowing that that answer might come with like a heavy answer with, I'm actually not doing well. And how would you handle that? So I think empowering your managers to say things and ask questions, because many of the ones that I've worked with, it's literally specifically in the tech. We're seeing a lot of mental health concerns specifically in the tech force, because these are very isolated workers to begin with. They've been working even more overtime. And the companies, many companies are very focused on these gig workers and how they can help them. And that has been the focus, is having a leader say, how is your day? And then if you're finding that they're not doing well, is minimally starting with the basics that you have at the organization. Do you need a day off? Do you need an hour? Do you need a break? And I think if you start at that base level, it starts to get easier to normalize the conversation within your own corporate culture.
But when I hear you say that, Mona Lisa, I think of, when we used to go to an office, and if I were to say that to somebody and they tell me, well, geez, I'm having a tough time, I'd almost be afraid to ask the question because I'm not sure what to do or what to say to
Right.
help.
Yeah, no, I think that's, you go, John.
No, go ahead, Bob, you go.
Yeah, I think what I've always got, I even when it comes to my husband, right? So it's like, so what do I say if they're having a bad day? I said, what would you say if they had cancer? It's like, is there anything I can do?
That's tough too.
Yeah, right. So sometimes it's the easy response, is there anything I can do? Or I'm here for you, right? Yep. And that might be the two easiest responses to employ, because the truth is they just wanted to hear you first. And I think having to help people understand that somebody with a mental health condition is not looking for you to be their therapist. They just want to connect. They just want you to know that they exist and they have a condition. And would you be sympathetic, or would you still accept me if I told you that I was having a bad day because I'm depressed? Yeah. I think is the basic, but I agree, Jim. It is a tough thing to do when you're, especially in a corporate setting, because you're like, oh God, don't cry on me. And I've been guilty of that too. And then I'm like, if they cry, what do I do? Right?
Yes.
So,
I think also, but I do think that there is that stigma too, not for the person who's going through it, because how is that going to affect my growth? How is that going to affect when they're looking for that leader who's tough and, doesn't get thrown off by things? They're not going to be looking at me because they just saw me have a meltdown or they saw me have a hard time with something. So I think that it's really, really hard to get comfortable sharing that level in a corporate setting when your career and your future depends on a lot of the way you're presenting yourself. Like, that's tricky.
And I think I agree with that 100%. And I think for it to work, it needs to start with the CEO. And the CEO, he or she, needs to make it clear in the workplace that it's a new day. Whoever is running the company needs to let people know that it's okay not to be okay. Yep. It's just not okay to pretend you're okay. And when that's real, and when I can walk into my manager and say, I'm not going to be here tomorrow, I have an appointment with my neurologist, and I feel the same, and he or she feels the same when I say, I have an appointment with my psychiatrist, and it isn't an awkward moment, then the workplace culture is changing. One of the things I would encourage people to do, because it's been so eye-opening for me, all the schools I've been to, the Center for Disease Control issues a test for high school students, it's anonymous, so nobody knows who's answering. They just know your age, your sex, and your year in school. They give them every 2 years, and 3 or 4 of the questions answered by high school students deal with mental health. And this is just a pinprick of a response, but it's probably true around the United States. It ought to concern every one of us. On the seacoast of New Hampshire, there were 5 high schools that had their kids take this test. 2019, just released. 47.6% of the junior girls in those 5 high schools answered the depression question affirmatively. and it doesn't use the word depression. Have you felt sad or hopeless for 2 consecutive weeks or longer in the last 12 months, such that you haven't been able to engage in normal everyday activity? 47%. 24% of the junior girls answered the question that said, have you given serious consideration to killing yourself? 24% said yes. 14% said, I've made plans in the last 12 months to take my own life. If you substituted diabetes or cancer or leukemia, it would be a national crisis. And as we know, most people with a mental health problem, by the way, are not going to engage in drug abuse or crime or anything like that. But sometimes it migrates there. And why aren't we dealing with it now? We'll deal with the drug overdose. We'll deal with the domestic violence. Why aren't we dealing with it? What are we afraid of? And it's everywhere, and it can be dealt with. And so I spent most of my time around young people. And I can say to everyone on this call, if you were at my shoulder in those gyms and auditoriums across northern New England and heard these kids, you would say, we're not doing this right. We're not having the discussion at home in our communities that we need to have. Police departments are having it. More police officers, by the way, in America die by suicide every year than every other cause on the line of duty. That's been the best kept secret in America. Police are starting to step up and say, we're not hollow. We see and do what you don't see and do. And what bothers me is so much of this is treatable. It requires leadership and conversation, as Mona Lisa was saying, and culture change. And in the world of business, if the CEO, he or she says, it's a new day here, health means mental health too, it will change. And it will be seen as way past time. It will be seen as way past time. And 10 years from now or 20 years from now, as I say to kids all the time, I don't want to be in the picture when they say, did you really treat mental health like that? Oh my goodness, what was wrong with you people? I don't want to be in that picture. And that day is coming, as certainly as we're talking today. I just want to accelerate the change. And business leaders have a bully pulpit that most people in America do not have.
Wow.
Thank you. There's this is such a powerful conversation, and there's so much to it. I know this isn't going to be the first time that we cover this. Jim, did you have any final thoughts before we wrap up? I just want to give you the opportunity to.
No, I applaud you and the team, Juliet, for making this a subject, once again, of a conversation here. And it's been a really interesting and good conversation. Mona Lisa, thank you for the work you do and for your openness and being such a good spokesperson for people who need a good spokesperson and concern. And John, the work you've done is extraordinary too. Your story is such an amazing story. I'm already thinking about it. I can't wait to tell friends that I've met the two of you, and I've got an opportunity once again to work with Kathy and Juliet. I'm a lucky person, and we're lucky we have people like Kathy and Juliet and Molly at Worth who thought that this was an area that we should focus our energy and attention on, so that maybe we can provide a little bit of a push and put it at the center of the table for our discussion.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We have shared a lot of the links that we talked about in the chat, and we've just shared some more links on Dartmouth Hitchcock and some resources there, and also the Bring Change to Mind URL as well. Mona Lisa, John, Kathy and Jim, thank you so much for such a thoughtful and open discussion into hopefully normalizing.
Thank you to Worth for doing this. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I think it's important, and I think it starts to sort of normalize this conversation. And a special thank you to you, Kathy, our partner for this series. Kathy's a private wealth advisor at Morgan Stanley. And we've got a lot of video from all of the series that we've done so far. So if you've missed any, please do look back at those, and we'll be sharing this one too. And most importantly, thanks to all of you that tuned in today and for your great engagement and for the questions. We hope you enjoyed it. Please do share any feedback with us at community@worth.com. And join us again next week at Worth Live for the next normal series. On Thursday at 3 p.m. we'll be looking at the future of space exploration. You can register for this and all of our other events on worth.com/events. In the meantime, stay healthy, be kind to yourself and everyone else, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.